What are the best speed boots you can currently get on the market? Well, to answer that question, we have to first explain what a speed boot even is. Now, it is somewhat of a loose definition, but generally I would describe a speed boot as a football boot that is light in weight and also has a thin upper. And these design traits ultimately leave you with a final product that's going to give you a really close touch on the ball. Now, there are dozens of football boots that can fall into this category, so in this video, I'm just going to give you a few of my favorites that I've worn over the past couple years and ones that I would recommend. So for each boot we discuss, I'm going to go through their feature set and also talk about who I think they would be best for. And of course, at the end of the video, if you're interested in picking up any of the boots we discuss, I'll try and leave links to them on sale in the description below. Some of those links may be affiliate links, which just means if you buy through them, it helps support the channel at no added cost to you. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So to kick things off, I figured we'd start with a boot that I recently reviewed in the Nike Vapor 16. Now, Nike more or less invented the speed boot category when the Vapors were first released over 20 years ago, and ever since they have been a constant force in the market, even though the series has gone through its ups and downs. Now, currently, you can buy the Nike Vapor 16 in 3 different versions. You can get the Elite version, which is going to run you $260. You can get the Pros that I have here, which are going to be $160. And then finally, you can get the Academy version, which retails for about $90. So it is nice that Nike is going to have 3 versions here for 3 very different budgets, and I have tried all of them and I think they are all solid, but I will say as far as value goes and my personal preference goes, I think the $160 Pro version is ultimately the way to go. The Elite version that retails for $260 or so has a really sticky grip knit upper, which I think is cool, and some people may actually like that sensation, but honestly, when I'm dribbling, I find it so easy just for the ball to get stuck underneath my feet, whereas the Pros here, you still get all the modern features that the Elite have to offer, like this elasticated fly knit material and a really aggressive sole plate, as well as a lightweight design with a thin upper, mind you, but the upper itself is actually going to have a much more matte finish, and I personally just like that feel and that touch it gives you on the ball a lot more. Now, the lockdown and the snug fit are some of the best features that you get out of the Vapor 16, but there are a few features of this boot that you might want to keep in mind. The first is the toe box is going to be somewhat on the narrow side, especially when compared to the average football boot. So if you are someone that has wider feet, they may not be the best long-term option for you. But for those of you with average to slightly narrower shaped feet in any variation, whether you go for the Elites, Pros, or Academy, I think Nike did really well with this version of the series. Now, next up, I wanted to touch on another model from Nike that I got to try on a couple months ago, and it was one of my favorites, and you may find it unexpected for the speed boot category, but it would be the Tiempo Legend 10. Now, more specifically, I tried on the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro in the Emerald variation that retailed for about $130. And while Nike doesn't necessarily advertise the Tiempo as being a speed boot style, in fact, some people associate it with being a more traditional, slightly padded, thick upper leather football boot, things have changed, and the new Tiempo Legend 10 is actually a full synthetic material called Fly Touch Pro that tries to emulate the feel of leather, and I think for what it's worth, it actually does a great job in doing that. And not only is the new upper very soft, but it's also extremely thin, and it's going to give you a super close touch on the ball, not too different from what you would find on the Vapor series. And for those of you who are looking for a more soft, slightly more natural, leather-like touch on the ball, you're going to get more of that from the Tiempo compared to the Vapor. You're also going to get a really soft sock-like inner liner for the Tiempo Legend 10 Pro and the Elite version that's going to retail for around $220. And for what it's worth, I also find that the Tiempos are just a little bit more accommodating and wide throughout the toe box compared to the Mercurial Vapor. I know some people have the mindset that if you're an attacker or a winger, you have to buy Vapors or you have to buy F50s and you can't buy any boot other than that. But no matter what position you play, there is no such thing as a position-specific football boot. You ultimately just want to go with what works best for you. And I would encourage anyone try on both of these boots. I would definitely say that the Vapor and the Tiempo are 2 of my favorites that Nike has to offer right now. Next, moving on to Adidas, we have a boot that I just mentioned, and that is going to be the F50. Now, there was so much hype when Adidas re-released the F50 in a brand new skin with a modified design earlier this year. They did a similar thing with the Predator series, which I thought was an alright football boot, although definitely not my favorite Predator. But I'm happy to say Adidas knocked it out of the park with the release of the F50. And not only that, Adidas has come out with 6 different price points and variations for the new F50. Because bear with me here, you have the F50 standard variation, and then you also have the F50 messy variation. And within those 2 silos, you are going to have an elite variation, a pro variation, and a league version. So ultimately, there's going to be 6 main boots. Similar to how Nike does their price structure, the elites are going to be around $260, the pros are $150, and then the leagues are going to be $90. And the F50 League is one of the boots I wanted to talk about most in this section, because while it is one of the more affordable F50 versions coming in at $90, I actually had more fun playing in the F50 League than I did the elites. And I found this really surprising because Adidas has kind of struggled when it's come to takedown models in the past. Sometimes whenever I try on a pair of Adidas boots that was, under that $120 to $130 price point, the lockdown wouldn't be great. They would feel bulky on feet. Sometimes the upper would bunch up. But whatever they've done within the past year, they've made a lot of positive changes, and their budget boots are a lot more comfortable. The lockdown you get throughout the heel area on the F50 Leagues is great. You get tons of security from the added lacing system, and all of the materials inside and outside the boot feel really premium, and they feel like they punch way above that $90 price tag. And for that reason, I would say if you're looking for a speed boot under the $100 price point, I would definitely recommend checking out the F50 League in either the standard or the messy variation. Speaking of that messy variation, I also got a chance to try on the F50 Messy Pro, which I picked up for about $130, and the fit is actually going to be really similar from what you get from the standard F50. There is going to be a slightly different design to the tongue, which is coined the burrito style tongue. It basically just wraps around your foot in a slightly modified way. You don't really notice it that much when the laces are tied up. However, what you do notice the most with the messy version compared to the standard version is the upper version on the messies feels a lot softer to the touch, and it actually reminds me of a more synthetic leather-like material similar to what Nike uses on the Tiempo Legend 10. Both uppers are really good. I would say if you're looking for something that's going to offer a little bit more sensitivity and be slightly more thin, probably check out the standard variation of the F50. But if you want something that's a little bit softer and might give you a more natural touch, then I would check out the messy version. And then as far as width goes, I would say that the F50s in both versions tend to fit relatively average. I have pretty wide feet and they were able to accommodate me, and I would say on the whole, they're slightly wider than the Vapor 16 from Nike. Moving on to our next model, we have another heavy hitter in the Mizuno Morelia Neo 4 Beta. And right here, I've got the elite versions of those boots, which I picked up for about $160. Now, there is also a made in Japan version of the Neo 4 Beta Elite, which is going to set you back closer to $300. But in my opinion, if you can find the elites, I would just go with these. They're not going to be made in Japan, but the build quality is going to be virtually the same as the MIJ version. Now, this is a funny selection in this list because Mizuno actually does make a more stereotypical speed boot in what they call the Mizuno Alpha. Now, that is a solid football boot that I did get to try on last year, but there were a few things I wasn't the biggest fan of about that boot. I thought the tongue and the upper felt just a little bit plasticky to me, and I didn't really feel like they stood out amongst the crowd of thin synthetic football boots, especially compared to what Nike and Adidas are doing. However, I feel like what Mizuno's bread and butter is, and one thing they always execute on really well, are leather football boots. And that's exactly what you're going to get with the Morelia Neo 4 Beta. And that's why for me, the Neo 4 Beta is going to be my favorite speed boot that Mizuno's currently making. I mean, of all the boots that we're going to discuss on this list, the Mizuno's here probably have some of the best build quality, definitely in the top 3 for build quality for sure. You're going to get an extremely soft kangaroo leather toe box, then a razor thin synthetic material throughout both sides of the midfoot, and then a soft, stretchy knit material that runs underneath the lacing system and then around the collar. And I mentioned this in my full review of the Neo 4 Beta, but where each of these materials connects to one another, it's just done so well and it's so seamless. And because you get that kangaroo leather in the toe box, it's also going to give you a really wide, accommodating fit that will also stretch over time as you start to break the boots in. And then to underscore how much of a speed boot this model is, is you get one of the most aggressive sole plates on this list. While it is going to feature mostly conical studs here, it's extremely rigid, and for those who are looking for a sole plate that offers you a lot of snap and structure, that's definitely what you're going to get from these boots. And if you've only ever worn boots from the bigger brands like Nike and Adidas, I would definitely recommend checking out Mizuno, and this model is going to be a great place to start. And next up, we got another one of my favorite leather boots that you can get right now, and that's going to be the Adler Herenzo. And these are by far the most worn boot in my current rotation. You can see just how worn this sole plate is getting. I mean, these were completely white when I first got them. Now they're extremely discolored, but the boots overall are holding up really well. Now, for those unfamiliar with Adler, they are a smaller company coming out of Japan, and they pretty much only specialize on making leather football boots. They've only got 4 core models to choose from, and of those 4, the thinnest and the lightest is going to be the Herenzos that I have here. Now, these are going to have a full kangaroo leather construction, and they retail for $150 US. But what I really like about the Adlers is that these are not your run-of-the-mill leather football boot. Because I've tried on dozens of leather boots from multiple different brands, and generally when you try on a pair of more classically designed leather boots, there's a focus on making the material not just really soft, but also somewhat plush, padded, and thick to the touch. But in this respect, the Adlers have a completely different design approach because the leather upper on the Herenzos here is razor thin. I mean, this upper is so thin that I'm kind of shocked that despite playing in these for almost, close to 8 or 9 months now, there's literally no rips or tears in the seam whatsoever. And that also leads me to believe that the leather and the quality that they're using is very strong. And the upper on these boots is why I wanted to include them in this list of the best speed boots of the year, because putting on these boots for the first time, it's almost hard to describe how it feels when they wrap around your feet. It literally feels like you're putting on a glove. They also have a slightly more relaxed feel to them. I think that's because the sole plate isn't quite as rigid as some of the other options that we've looked at thus far. For example, there's a little bit more flexibility and softness to the sole plate compared to the Mizunos we just looked at, and for me, that actually makes for a slightly less fatiguing and more enjoyable playing experience. Now, I think the upper might be a little bit love it or hate it for some people. I think some may think it's just a bit too on the basic side, but I just love how this design, it's really clean, really sharp and flowing from the toe box all the way to the heel area. The stitching is so well done, and overall the boots kind of just highlight the leather. Now, the one weird thing I would point out about the Adler Herenzos, and probably any Adler boot in general, is the sizing is a little bit crazy, and these boots run extremely long. I typically wear a size 10.5 US, but in these I went for a 9.5, and I still had a tiny bit of space at the end of the boots, so I would definitely recommend going a full size down. But if you're a player who likes leather football boots, or you just generally like a minimalist approach to football boots and having that razor thin upper, I would definitely